So now for another episode of things Pastor Ian did in his teens that he would rather not remember. It's not that bad, actually. So when I was in 8th grade, we had a substitute teacher who was doing her best to keep order and teach the day's lesson. There's a special room in heaven tricked out with all the luxuries for middle school substitute teachers, I'm convinced. So as this teacher turned around to write something on the board, a kid I knew flicked a paper ninja star at me and then looked up at the board with utter innocence and concentration as the teacher turned back around to ask us a question. Now, I was a pretty good kid in junior high and not very practiced at the kind of stealth and timing you need to pull off classroom shenanigans without getting caught. So when I thought the teacher wasn't looking, I swiveled and fired the paper star back at my buddy, and then I heard her voice demanding to know what I was doing. I turned back around, completely caught, and instead of facing up to my responsibility, I blurted out, well, he threw it first. That's right, I was that kid. I narked. I broke the unwritten code held sacred by all teenagers and by many adult groups as well. Never rat out your own side. Bad, bad, bad. And it didn't even help my cause because the teacher replied that all she had seen was what I did, and so I needed to go out and stand in the hall. Hey, well, this is exactly the dynamic we find in today's reading from the Garden of Eden in Genesis. When God asks the man if he ate from the forbidden tree, he replies, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate," thus managing to cast blame on two others at once: the woman for giving him the fruit, and God for having given him the woman in the first place. The woman whom you gave to me. So really, God, this is all your fault. How sad and how human. Instead of facing up to his responsibility, the man deflects the blame resentfully back at God and rather pathetically at the woman. Or at least it would seem pathetic if it didn't express a dynamic that is so devastatingly with us to this day. You know, Christians often read this story through the lens of St. Augustine as a tale about original sin, the fall of the first humans from which we have never recovered. And also, due to forces in Christianity, in Christian history, we usually understand that sin to have something to do with sexuality. But neither of these ideas is particularly present in the biblical story itself, in which the man and the woman are more clearly responsible for disobeying God and eating fruit that gives them God-like knowledge of good and evil. That disobedience, that ambition to become God is the real sin. And it seems to me that there are sins that arise out of that disobedience in this story and whose legacy deserves our attention as Christians. And one of those involves this casting of blame that we've been looking at today, especially the casting of blame by man onto woman. It was her fault. She made me do it. This crazy creature that you call woman, God, put here on earth to mess up my life. Here, we see the roots of a deep-seated and vicious misogyny that is alive and well in our contemporary world. Abuse, it was her fault. She was talking back to me. Sexual assault, it was her fault. She was wearing that tight dress. Unwanted pregnancy, her fault. Messy house, her fault. Teenage son truant from school, definitely her fault. Never mind that he's twice her size, and being a single mom, she's working 2 full-time jobs just to keep him fed, clothed, and housed. By contrast to this blaming of the woman in Genesis, in our gospel today, Jesus builds a radical new definition of family. You may recall I talked about this a little bit at Mother's Day about a month ago. Jesus declares that his real family is not his biological mother and brothers, but those who are sitting with him. Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. This sounds crazy until you remember that the family of the ancient Near East was a structure quite oppressive of women and children and servants who had few protections and little power against the male head of the household. So Jesus pushes back on this system. He pushes back on this institutionalized hatred and blaming of women that the man in Genesis gives voice to. And so are we called to do as well. Rather than use Genesis 3 and other texts to keep women down, which unfortunately is a major thread in our tradition, we in the church should be a place that calls our culture's hatred of women out for what it is. We should be a place where women can be lifted up as openly powerful leaders. We should be a place where the original sin of woman blaming gives way to Jesus's new standard of a true family, defined first and foremost by whoever does the will of God. Amen.